My name is Adrian Jackson. I'm Artistic Director of Cardboard Citizens, and we have been working for on and off for a couple of years actually with Professor Nick Crowson of Birmingham University, who has been doing this extraordinary work of trying to recover the voices of 19th and late 19th and early 20th century vagrants. And since Cardboard Citizens obviously is one of the things that somebody's got a microphone doing very weird stuff. One of the things that we like to do is tell untold stories and hear unheard voices. And when I first became aware of Nick's work, I just thought, this can't be. How on earth can these very undocumented people be heard? And as you'll see from this evening, Nick has assiduously pursued through court reports, workhouse reports, asylum reports, and newspaper reports and census documents, the lives of a considerable number of people who fell foul of the Vagrancy Act in the latter part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century. And the work we've been doing, this is the fourth and so far final one of a series, is with a bunch of Cardboard Citizens actors. We have been taking Nick's documents, being pretty faithful to them, but trying to find those voices and also detect when they are accurately represented and when they are not so accurately represented, when we feel those voices are very mediated. Obviously, these are mostly official documents. So the voices are very partially recorded. Tonight, because we are doing some work in Coventry, we're delighted to be working in Coventry later this year as part of City of Culture, and we're doing a residency there, so-called cardboard camps there, and we're doing a show there as well. We thought we'd give it more of a Midlands focus, so we asked Nick Crowson to dig up some more local to Coventry people who have fallen foul of the Vagrancy Act in this period. And so we have two sets of subjects tonight, which I'll come on to in a moment. So that's us. I'm currently looking at a photograph of three vagrants. These are genuine photographs, but I'm wondering whether you can see me, because unusually on Zoom I can't see myself, so I'm just getting slightly nervous, but presuming that I must be visible. Somebody will tell me in the chat if I'm not visible. Okay, what would be very nice is briefly for us to introduce this evening's actors and contributors. And because we are trying to make this accessible and we have a caption, I'm delighted to report tonight. Also, it would be useful if each of our participants could briefly describe themselves so that others can picture if they can't see the images on the screen. So my name's Adrian Jackson, and I'm a grey-haired man just over 60 with a slightly sort of forbidding and slightly stern or worried look on my face most of the time. And if I could ask others to introduce themselves. So David, one of our actors.
Hello.
David.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name's David Olapuju, and I'm the coloured chap with the stringy hair.
Did you really just say that? Okay, you could say that. I couldn't. Okay, okay. So David with stringy hair, and Libby Liebert. Libby. This is the first of many such moments we are going to experience this evening where we chorus together. You are on mute, and I should warn, even worse than that, we have a number of, at least one of our actors has a really dodgy internet connection, so we may go robotic at different times. So we're all used to this by now, and we only have to face about another 6 weeks of it, and we're in clear blue water. So Libby, are you there? Okay, we'll abandon Libby Pixie, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name's Pixie. I'm 59. I would describe myself as a large set, short-haired bloke. Geezer.
Geezer. All right, that's very clear. I've got a very good picture of you. Who else have we got? Nikki, please.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm one of the actors. I'm really tiny. I'm only 5'2". I've got brown hair, and I describe myself as a ladette.
Okay, that's very good and very clear. And who haven't we yet introduced? Is Libby with us now? Okay, that's a wee bit of...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now, thank God.
Oh,
Yes.
thank God for that. Sorry. Shall I
describe yourself? Yeah.
Yes, so I'm Libby. I'm a tall white woman with long dark hair. I wear hoop earrings and I've got a big mouth.
Good, thank you very much. And then we have also participating tonight is Terry O'Leary, our Associate Director. Terry?
Okay, yeah, good evening everyone. My name's Terry O'Leary and I'm happy to be acting alongside our fine actors. I am older than Pixie, but younger than Adrian. I have salt and pepper hair. I'm 1 inch taller than, I'm 5'3", and I think I have a mischievous face.
Okay, very good. And Nick Crowson. Nick, please.
Hi everyone. Well, I'm driven to grey because I have kids. I'm an academic, not an actor, and you'll probably hear me mangling every English word possible. And I'm 6'2", so perhaps the tallest here.
Very good, thanks, Nick. And I'm very happy to have a local guest. I think the word is Coventronian. I probably got that wrong. Who is Rob? Rob, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to
yes.
describe yourself and also just say a tiny bit of this thing about yourself? Rob will be on our panel afterwards talking. Rob.
Yes, I'm a over 65-year-old Coventrian, for those who can't pronounce it properly, and I'm part of a community theatre called Underground Lights at the Belgrade in Coventry.
And Rob, when we first spoke about you taking part in this, I wondered if you wanted to read a bit of the Vagrancy Act out to us. It infuriated you and you refused to read it. Could you just say a bit about that? Because maybe people don't really know about this act.
Well, I suppose it's because it's like still on the statute books after 190 years. There was a huge debate about implementing it in the first place, but it was so presumptuous about, it's almost a not in my backyard scenario. Those that make the rules didn't want to see people who were struggling and in crisis, and a lot of it is still going on today, and it's extremely annoying it's gone on for so long.
Okay, well, I won't make you read it. We did inflict it on our audience early on, and it runs to 7 to 10 minutes from an actor reading it at speed. And Nick will probably tell us later, it encompasses an extraordinary range of offences. It's been with us for over 150 years now and is still used to criminalise people, and we're going to talk about that a bit later. Okay, if we're all in and all ready, this is the shape of the evening. We're going to give you some extracts that we have, documents around the lives of two sets of people. The first one, Alfred Draper, it's quite wordy, and we are literally reading court documents and so on, and it probably will last about 15 minutes, I should think, and then we'll have a brief discussion about it. And then our second subjects are very different, and we have much less documentation about them, and therefore we are taking the risk of improvising around them. And that'll be the second half of the evening. And we very much want observations, questions, thoughts, reactions. Interactivity is one of the things we do at Cardboard Citizens, so please be that interactive person. Okay, I'm still slightly bothered by just watching this faces of these three unhappy looking people. So could they be removed now, or is it only me that's looking at them? That's great. Okay, so we'll start, and if everybody's ready, we'll start. Pixie, could you just briefly introduce our first subject for the night, Alfred Draper?
Yes, Adrian. Alfred Draper was born in 1861 in Nantwich. He moved around a lot as a kid, mainly living with his mother and his four siblings.
Do we have a sense of why he lived with his mum rather than his dad?
We have little inklings into what the dad was about. He was a shoe hand, but we don't have total knowledge of exactly what his dad was up to at those times.
And there's some kind of rift between them, yes, because the first document we have is the dad taking his son to court for stealing his tools.
Exactly. He's accused of stealing the tools from his dad's business, and then later on, we find by the sort of late 1880s, that is, he's tramping around the Midlands and making occasional appearances in court for things like begging and damaging straw, and at one point even demanding jam tarts with menaces.
You're not joking, are you? He was literally done for demanding jam tarts with menaces. Okay, let's hear about Alfred Draper. Thank you.
Okay. Alfred Draper, 1861 to 1925. These are the remaining records of my life.
Leicester Chronicles, 24 of October, 1885.
Leicester Town Hall, Borough Sessions.
Headline, charge of robbing a father. Alfred Draper.
I'm 24 years old.
Alfred Draper, shoe finisher of 45 Littleton Street, was charged with stealing a heel shave, a drag, a dummy iron, a file, and a burnisher, the property of his father, Thomas Draper, of the value of 5 shillings and 10 pence.
Thomas Draper, I'm bringing the case. I'd put the tools in question in a small box in the back room on Saturday last week, and I missed them on the following Friday. I had told my son that he could have the tools if he paid for them, but he had not paid, so he had no authority to take them away.
James Lamb of 3 Diamond Street. The prisoner showed me the tools and I brought some of them on Friday the 16th for 2 shillings and 9 pence.
John Jackson, toolmaker. I purchased the heel shave for 1 shilling 6 pence from Alfred Draper.
Detective Crisp. I arrested the prisoner and I recovered the tools from Mr. Lamb and Mr. Jackson.
I've been given the tools by my father, but I sold them because I was tired of the shoe trade and wanted to do something else.
I hope the bench will deal leniently with my son. I only took proceedings in the hope that it would make him improve his conduct. If he will promise to go away from home and earn his own living, I'd be willing to withdraw the charge.
I promise.
We are satisfied to withdraw the case, but advise you, Mr. Draper, to bring your son before us again if he does not carry out his promise.
Leicester Chronicles, 7th of May, 1887.
Before I, Harrison, in the chair.
Remember that name?
Alfred Draper, shoe hand of Littleton Street, Leicester, is charged with sleeping in a barn without any visible means of subsistence and damaging straw to the amount of 1 shilling and 6 pence, the property of I. Harrison Esquire.
The same guy as is judging me.
The property of I. Harrison Esquire on the 3rd of May.
I've been sleeping in the barn for some weeks, but I've never committed any damage.
William Hampson, shepherd to Mr. Harrison. Evening, sir.
Evening, Hampson.
Found that man in the barn last night. he had untied 3 battens of straw upon which he was lying, whilst the 4th he'd got over him for a covering.
Draper, we will sentence you to 14 days hard labour.
And for the damage, a fine of 5 shillings with costs of 11 shillings.
And damages of 1 shilling and 6pence, or 14 days hard labour.
1 term to follow the other.
For sleeping rough and damaging Mr. Harrison's straw.
Rugby Advertiser, 11th of April 1888.
Headline, a fine-mouthed tramp.
Alfred Draper, tramp, is charged with begging at Hilmerton, not guilty, Your Honour.
Emma Busby, wife of Fred Busby. Between 11 and 12 on Saturday, the prisoner came to my house and asked for a crust of bread. I refused because a fortnight earlier he had come begging and I had given him a slice of bread and meat, the latter being fat. He asked for a knife and I lent him one. And when he immediately cut the fat off and said,
"Here, missus, I'm not much of a fat eater. Perhaps someone else would like this."
And then I saw him going to several other houses.
P.C. Hayes. I had heard reference to the cheeky way in which the prisoner was going about the village, so I went in search of him and eventually arrested him in a public house in Rugby, where he was about to discuss half a pint of ale and some bread and cheese. The prisoner had no defence.
14 days.
Because I cut the fat off the meat and gave it back to the lady.
Staffordshire Chronicle, 15th of December, 1888.
Staffordshire Borough Petty Sessions.
Headline, he will shoot them all.
Alfred Draper, shoe hand of no fixed abode, is charged with being drunk and disorderly in broad eye on Sunday, and also with assaulting P.C. Brown in his execution of his duties.
P.C. Nuttall. At about 12:10 a.m. on Sunday, I found the defendant very drunk in broad eye. He was singing, and on being told to go away, he struck me across the face. When I tried to arrest him, he swore at me and began kicking. He also threatened to stab me in the heart and tried to get his hand to his pocket, but I prevented him. He then threatened me. When I came out of jail, I will get a revolver and shoot you coppers down like dogs.
I don't remember saying that.
P.C. Brown, I assisted my colleague and was kicked several times about the legs, inflicting wounds.
I was drunk.
Inspector Stratton, we found this large clasp knife on the defendant. He had been in town for about 2 months. He never worked and was a terror to the neighbourhood.
You are sentenced to 14 days hard labour for the drunkenness and a month's hard labour for the assault.
Stafford Chronicles, 18th May 1889. Headline, The Jack the Ripper Scare. Alfred Draper, shoe finisher, a young man with smart, intelligent-looking face, was charged with begging at Marsden on May 7th.
The prisoner, who is otherwise known as Jack the Ripper, appeared in court with a ragged old suit of clothes, a piece of sacking fastened over his shoulders in the form of a cape, and sacking leggings.
I admit I begged a cup of tea.
Annie Douglas from Marsden. On Tuesday, that man came to my door of my house and I shoved him outside, locked the door and went upstairs. I watched him out of sight, but after some time, he came again. When I unlocked the door, he asked me for some bread. I gave him none and he went away. He didn't threaten me in any way.
Mrs. Hannah Beck, that man came to my door on Tuesday morning. He had been there often before. My little boy went to the door. I was upstairs and I heard Draper ask for some bread. My little boy replied that I did not have any. The prisoner then went next door, back and front. I was almost afraid to go to the door for him, for when he was refused, he was very saucy and he slammed the gate as though he would break it.
Inspector Price, I have complaints about this man from people 20 miles round. He has been frightening people in the neighbourhood.
Major Johnston, why do you go about in this manner, Draper?
I wanted something to do.
Well, we'll give you a little to do on the treadmill. You have been convicted of assaulting the police and of being drunk and disorderly. It's no use fixing people like you. You're a regular vagrant, and your appearance is enough to frighten anybody. You'll serve 14 days hard labour.
That's the Chronicle. 20th of July, 1889, headline, Assault on a Child.
Thomas Draper.
My dad, Thomas Draper, not me.
Thomas Draper, a shoemaker lodging in Bedford Street, is charged on warrant with assaulting Lillian Rosetta Nighthall, a schoolgirl, 7 years of age, living in Redcross Street on the 16th of July.
Henry West of 18 Arundel Street. About 3:15 on Tuesday afternoon, I was standing near the West Bridge when I saw the prisoner talking to a little boy and a girl who was sitting on a wall. I thought the man's conduct suspicious, so I called it to the attention of a policeman, and together we saw the prisoner take the children up King Richard's Road to some allotment gardens near the Foss Road. There, he gathered some flowers for the children, and I subsequently witnessed him commit an assault upon the little girl.
PC Martin, I can collaborate what Mr. West has said.
I was with drink at the time, but I did not assault the girl.
Mr. Dunn, this is Thomas Draper's 17th appearance in this court and at Stafford.
The prisoner is evidently a thoroughly bad fellow and must go to jail for 3 months with hard labour.
That's my dad, all right.
Lichfield Mercury, 18th of March, 1892.
Rugeley Police Court before F. Bonney, Esquire.
Headline, A Dangerous Character. Alfred Draper, shoemaker of no fixed abode, is charged with vagrancy and begging last Saturday evening in the Hagley Road. The prisoner had a sack over his head and is known to have frightened many people in the neighbourhood with his peculiar conduct.
Harriet Lees, wife of Thomas Lees. I was coming into the town on Saturday evening at about 7 o'clock when the prisoner stopped me and asked me to give him a halfpenny for a bit of bacca. I told him I had none and he passed on. I was very much afraid of him, as the children had told me of him being about.
Sergeant Murphy, the prisoner had begged of Mr. Lees on Sunday last.
I admit, I did ask the woman for a halfpenny.
He's a professional beggar. He is in the habit of intimidating people. I've received numerous complaints of his conduct.
Magistrate, I have myself seen this man about the country.
PC Rocket. I have known this man for years, and I've heard that he has pulled knives to children and girls and is a very dangerous character.
Draper?
What's the point?
Begging in the district has become a great nuisance, and the bench is determined to try and put a stop to it. You are sentenced to 14 days hard labour.
I only wanted a bit of bacca.
Ashbourne News. Telegraph, 16th September 1892.
Ashbourne Petty Sessions.
Headline, An Epicurean Tramp.
Alfred Draper, a shoemaker of no fixed abode, is charged with begging on the 8th of September at various places and further with intimidating people in order to obtain victuals.
PC Carville. At 2:30 p.m, I was on duty in Longford when I saw the defendant going along a road, and thinking that he had been begging, I took him back to some houses nearby. And on inquiry, I was told he had been demanding food. In this case, he had demanded some jam tarts and tea.
Oh, no.
Having refused cream bread and butter. And at another place, he demanded a pasty.
Draper, the offence has been proved that you did go about intimidating people, and for that reason you will be sent to prison for a month with hard labour.
All for the sake of some jam tarts and a pasty?
Leicester Chronicle, 2nd of March, 1895. Headline, A Dangerous Practice.
Alfred Draper, of no fixed abode, is charged with sleeping in an outhouse belonging to Thomas Savage at Gilroy without any visible means of subsistence on February the 23rd.
PC Giles. I found the man sleeping on some trousers of hay. His pipe, which he had been smoking and which was still hot, was lying amongst the hay.
Superintendent Ormiston. A fire was caused at this place 4 months ago under precisely the same circumstances.
10 days imprisonment. Leicester Journal, 5th of June, 1896.
Headline, brought on by religious mania.
On Monday evening, an inquest was held at Leicester concerning the death of Louisa Draper.
My sister.
Louisa, aged 23, who lived with her sister Catherine at 30 Pringle Street. It appeared from the evidence of Catherine Draper that on Sunday afternoon, whilst temporarily absent from the house, she received information that the deceased had been taken ill. Upon going home, she found her sister leaning against the copper, apparently in great pain. She said,
I did it. I'm dying. Bring me mustard and water.
This was given to her and medical aid summoned, but before the doctor arrived, the deceased expired. The medical evidence showed that death was due to poisoning from salts of lemon. Deceased is stated to have suffered from depression of spirits brought on by religious mania. A verdict was returned.
Suicide during temporary insanity.
My little sister Louisa. Poor thing.
Leicester Daily Post, 26th of March, 1906. Headline, Caught in the Act. Alfred Draper, labourer of Britannia Street, Leicester, was charged with stealing £72 of old iron, the property of the Midland Railway Company, value 1 shilling 6 at Syston on March 23rd.
Horace
Horace
Taylor.
Taylor.
I'm a blind manufacturer from Syston, and I was informed that a trespasser was in my field, which is near the Midland Railway. It was there that I saw the prisoner come from the railway with a bag on his back. There was a quantity of old iron in the bag.
The court is aware of previous convictions for the theft of mushrooms. 7 days with hard labour.
Leicester Chronicle, 20th of May, 1913.
Headline. Theft of a trough. Alfred Draper, 47, rag gatherer, lodging in A1 Britannia Street, was charged with stealing at Leicester on May 17th a water trough, value 5 shillings, the property of the governors of the Wiggiston Hospital.
PC Woodward. About 11:15 at night, I saw a man go to the Narborough Road allotments and try and pull a pump handle out. He could not do so, and then he went to an iron trough, smashed it to pieces and put them in a bag. I then caught the man. If I had been any later, he would have got away.
I did not smash the trough. I was placing the pieces on the ground when the constable arrived. I've been a shoe hand, but I've done no shoe work for some years.
1 month hard labour.
Then no word is heard of Alfred Draper for 12 years.
Inquest into the death of Alfred Draper, 12th of August, 1925.
The said Alfred Draper, formerly lodging at 1 Britannia Street in the said city, was found dead in the canal near Holden Street on the 11th of August. Death was due to suffocation by drowning, and there is not sufficient evidence to show how the deceased came to be in the water. And I, Edward George Bennett Fowler, do further say that the said Alfred Draper at the time of his death was a male person of age 63 years and a rag gatherer.
Please identify yourself.
Albert Edward Sanderson. I am the manager of the A1 lodging house, number 1 Britannia Street, and I reside at 56 Russell Street, Leicester.
What was your relationship with the deceased?
I have known Draper for about 3 years. He has stayed at the lodging house until about 6 months ago. I persuaded him to leave on account of his verminous conditions. Since then, I have seen him about in the streets almost daily until the past few weeks.
Does he have any family?
As far as I know, he has no relatives and he has had no lodging since he lived here. He has been sleeping out.
You believe the deceased took his own life?
He has never threatened that he would commit suicide.
How do you believe he ended up in the canal?
He drank a good deal. He spent most of his money on drink.
Walter Smith, police constable. About 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday, the 11th of August, I went to the canal side. near to Holden Street Bridge in answer to a telephone message. I then saw the deceased floating in the water near to the side. I recovered the body with the aid of the drags. He was dead and fully dressed, apart from he had no hat. I removed the body to the city mortuary. I searched the clothing. I found a purse containing 3 shillings and a wire cutter. The deceased was wearing trousers over the top of breeches and puttees, a sports coat, an overcoat, and a light raincoat.
And a last word to Thomas Stevenson Blackledge. I'm a surgeon and assistant to Dr. Spriggs, the city police surgeon. On Tuesday, the 11th of August, I was called to the city mortuary. I arrived there about 10:30. I found the deceased, Alfred Draper, lying dead. He had been dead upwards of a week. I examined the body. There were no signs of injury or suspicious appearances. It was in a decomposed state. In my opinion, death was due to suffocation by drowning. Alfred Draper. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. So a life in a number of court appearances. So thank you, our actors, for our first subject. And I suppose it'd be interesting to get any reactions, observations. One of the things we billed this event was about family and the effect of family on people's lives at the time and different versions of family. But let me go first to Rob. Rob, immediate reactions, thoughts when you hear that life. You heard it earlier when we were talking about it. Thoughts?
Yeah, my initial thoughts were, whose father would charge them to borrow their tools? It seems a strange thing to do. And given that his father's later history, it may be that the Alfred Draper in question that we're talking about suffered some form of parental abuse along with his siblings. So it could be that that is an endemic state of mind that forced him from home.
Does some of the elements of this story ring true in sort of modern terms, in people that you've known, people you've met, in the various reasons people find themselves homeless?
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of homeless people that I'm aware of, many of whom have suffered from domestic violence from their partners or from their parents, have found themselves with nowhere to live and are forced to take to the streets. It's a situation that hasn't ever been resolved, and I don't know a way out of it. People lose their families and regret it for years afterwards.
Thank you. Nick Crowson, what do you have to add to what Rob said? I mean, you have cleverly found documents about his family. Do you think that our subject, Alfred, knew these things that had happened to his sister, knew that his father had been in court? What are your theories? What have you been able to piece together?
My sense is that he's back in Leicester in 1896 when his sister commits suicide, and given the media coverage that received, I'd be very surprised if he wasn't aware. One of the things that seems to be going on with Alfred's life is that his father's presence is always the reason for him not to be around. So after that initial shoe tool trial, he begins circulating, and he moves through initially Northamptonshire, then into Warwickshire, spends a fair bit of time around the Rugby area, and then he moves on to Staffordshire, which is essentially the county he grew up in. He moves through from being the shoe hand to now the beggar, the habitual beggar. And then he returns back to Leicester and becomes the rag gatherer and scavenger. And I think the reason that he remains thereafter in Leicester is because his father returns to Staffordshire and subsequently dies. And I think that was the last reason. There's also another element. If you listen to some of those early transcripts that we heard, you could hear him repeating the family address. So he clearly retained some form of association, or at least initially in those early years, thought of that he had that geographical association. He talks about himself being of Nantwich throughout his life when in court. And the element that seems to be the final trigger after that shoe trial is the death of his mother, who had clearly raised him, and clearly he's much closer to her than his father.
Do you agree with Rob's suggestion that there may be a backstory of abuse going on there?
Well, that's obviously one of the challenges. We don't have that direct kind of evidential base, so we're kind of speculating and feeling our way through it. The fact that a sister commits suicide, looking at the other siblings, they seem to all leave the family nest at the first opportunity, and yeah, again, it's circumstantial, but there's clearly something going on. There is not a good relationship, shall we say, between him and his father.
There's something weird going on there. Can I invite any of our audience to put questions or observations or comments in the chat, please? Particularly things that reactions, observations, comments are stimulated by what we've just seen. Rob, one of the things I notice about Alfred is his appearance seems to frighten people. There's lots of references to. Do you have thoughts about that, about the way people are just sort of scared of associating at times with people who are on the streets?
Yes, very probably, but you have to remember that they don't have access to washing machines and means of washing their clothes, or buying new clothes, or even being donated clothes. And if you are on the street, especially in winter, you are going to have to wrap up very warm indeed, because those pavements are cold.
Yeah, at one time he's described as having a sacking cape and sacking trousers, whatever. He's obviously sort of assembled clothing from what's around him. What about the actual crimes? I also invite any of our actors who wish to make a comment. How is it, Pixie? How is it reading this guy? What do you get from entering into him, from reading him?
I think the thing that really stood out for me, a lot of it's been mentioned, but it's some of the things he's accused of, being Jack the Ripper. I mean, it's sort of, he's asking for something and suddenly he's Jack the Ripper and he's an Epicurean tramp. And it's sort of, he seems to be trying to avoid people most of the time and just getting them when he can get what he, to get enough to survive on. And he's getting headlines in the local press. I mean, Jack the Ripper was the biggest mass murderer of the time. He was that everywhere. And this is a bloke who's asking for, can I have a jam tart, please? It's a bit, there's a lot of overkill in the press. I imagine he would feel very, very victimised.
He's hardly Jack the Ripper, is he? I mean, that's an interesting sort of exotic case, which has been much discussed, much written about more recently. Nick, I mean, what would the connection be? I mean, this is almost exactly contemporaneous with Jack the Ripper's killings. Why would people latch on that in that way? What are your thoughts?
Selling papers.
Selling papers. Selling papers.
We heard that reference to the clasp knife, and I'm guessing that an editor has picked up on the fact that he's scared of some children and he's scared some ladies of the community, and that he's being found with a knife at some point, and then there was that supposed threat to the police officers during resisting arrest. So they've just kind of overly sensationalized it, and they're trying to kind of play up this threat of the beggar, the aggressive beggar, which is such a dominant narrative in the historical way that beggars are described.
A couple of comments I want to highlight. I'm not sure whether, I hope that certainly in the latter part of the evening, it'll be possible for people to speak in their own name. But Sarah Wood's comments on the fact that he cut the meat, he cut the fat off the meat and gave it back to the woman who gave it to him, that somehow he should take what he's given and has no right to state any preferences. This reminds Sarah of how banks inevitably make decisions for people that are so basic about wants and needs. It's sort of connected, isn't it, with the idea of the deserving poor. You have no right to critique my gift of this food to you. Rob, you're smiling during that, and
yes, yeah, I can just imagine it. That phrase coming out, just giving back the fact that it's like, you know, Jack Sprat.
And Hayley has this comment also that the thing that sticks out for her is criminalizing Alfred with hard labor is ineffective in dealing with vagrants. Totally. I mean, as who was saying totally there, are we better these days at dealing with people's street, people who are forced to live on the street than they were then, or does it just seem exactly the same? I mean, last couple of comments maybe before we move to our other subject. Rob, any thoughts about that?
No, not at the moment. I'll leave that to someone else.
No thoughts at the moment, or you think it's no better at the moment?
I don't think it's changed much, to be fair. I think that people living on the streets or being homeless they're victims of society in general.
And any brief thought about what has happened this year and most recently in COVID times with the putting people in hotels? Any thoughts about that? Has that been a policy well followed through in Coventry?
It's been followed through, but taking people to hostels and hotels and things and sort of locking them away on the outskirts of the city means they no longer have any access to services that are in the centre of the town, because they're not allowed to travel, or would in a lot of cases have to walk to the city centre for things like benefits if they ever get them. Anything else. They're virtually prisoners.
Okay, so quite critical of that policy. Okay, I think probably we should move to our second subject for the night. And here, because we have much less evidence, we have speculated more and we are improvising more. So let's have our second subject. There's a few comments about the headlines. I'm not sure if everybody can see these messages or not. The headlines, the relentless demonization of the poor. It feels incredibly current. Okay, here's a challenge, guys, and this is very interactive. Before we start, please turn your microphones on if you have a thought. I invite you, oh audience, to look at these two people who are our next two subjects and speculate. What do you see in these photos? There are surprisingly quite a few photos of some of our subjects, but anybody looking at this guy on the left, please, anybody, feel free to unmute yourself and make a comment about what you see. This guy on the left with the hat, he's one of our second subjects. Any thoughts? What do you see when you look at this guy? Actors, commentators, anyone?
I think he looks, he looks quite respectable compared to
He looks respectable. That's interesting because of he's smartly dressed, yes?
Yeah, and his hat and his tie on. He looks like quite done up.
He does, doesn't he? Any other observations about? Yes, Kim says he looks very well dressed, but his eyes seem vacant. Okay. Other people agree or disagree with that?
He looks bewildered.
He looks bewildered. What do you think he's bewildered by?
Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, we presume he's being photographed I believe Nick has told us, probably as part of the criminalisation process, thus the rather plain brick wall behind him.
One of the first
Anybody
things I
else?
thought, Adrian, was he was wearing his weddings, funerals, and court appearances clothes.
He's wearing his court appearances clothes. And Jesse says he looks frightened and intimidated by authority. And what about the lady on the right? She's slightly blurred out. Sorry. What about the lady on the right? Any thoughts about her? I didn't catch that if that was addressed at us. Lady on the right, any thoughts?
He looks
Ben?
defensive.
She looks defensive. Okay. Haley says she looks sad. Yes, sir. She looks defeated, says Wes and Lisa. Anybody else?
I think they both look like they come from financially tough backgrounds, but they're portraying that they're together on the outside, but they look poor. There's a poorness about
that voice. I know that's Chelsea's voice.
Yeah, there's a poorness in their. It's just their faces. They're having tough lives.
They're having tough lives, and also I think you're saying they're deliberately dressing in a way to sort of counter views that people might have on
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right, this is a little tantalizing glimpse. Now we'll tell you a bit about these people and we'll give you these lives. It's shorter than the previous one. They're not the same person. Kim Hackelman had an interesting theory that they could be the same person in disguise. No, they are two people and we'll tell you about them now. So the first of our subjects, please, Ada.
I'm Ada Mary Damery. I was born in 1894 and died in 1930.
Stanley Victor Morel, 1887 to 1917.
Okay.
Leicester Daily Post, 29th of August, 1911.
Borough Police Court, begging in Leicester, a paying occupation.
Stanley Victor Morel, 24, a carman of 21 Little Northampton Street, Clerkenwell, and Ada Demery, 22, a single woman of the same address, were charged at the Borough Police Court on Monday morning with placing themselves in the Humberston Gate for the purposes of inducing the giving of alms on August the 26th. The defendants pleaded guilty.
BC Staines. At about 12:50 on Saturday last, I was on duty in plain clothes in Humberston Gate, where I saw the two defendants standing outside the tramway office. The male defendant was playing a street piano while the woman was standing between the shaft of the piano taking money. I watched them for some time and I saw about a dozen people give their money. I then arrested the defendants and took them to the Central Police Station. On searching Morrell, £1 and 1 shilling and half pence was found in his possession, while the female defendant,
Damery,
his companion, had 1 shilling, 8 and a half pence.
Stanley Morrell.
I admit that was money taken on Saturday morning. Ada is not my wife, but we have been cohabiting together for the last 7 weeks. I have obtained my living playing the street piano for the last 3 years.
Attached to the piano was a card with the following: ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am a London carman out of employment through failing
eyesight, Stanley. Put failing eyesight.
All right. Being discharged for this reason after 5 years good service.
Good service, Stanley.
All right, I'm doing it. Right. I am doing this to enable
me to keep a roof over the heads of my wife and 2 children.
Lovely. And to keep myself respectable whilst out of employment, any of which would be gladly accepted in preference to doing this?
I had sold up nearly all of our home to pay rent and provide food for my wife and children. Have you written that down?
The notice concluded with the words, "I am now looking forward to the time when some lady and gentleman will kindly employ me, thus taking me from this degrading position."
I am yours.
Obediently.
I am yours obediently, Stanley Morrow.
Your Honour, I was not taking money. People put it in the hat and I would say, thank you.
Detective Sergeant Faulkner, I made inquiries of colleagues in London and I received a telephone message from a superintendent of the Metropolitan Police stating that Murrell had not been employed at the place stated for the last 5 years. His 2 children were living with his mother-in-law. He had a wife.
Murrell, you are sentenced to 21 days hard labour. The Mayor, you are sentenced to 7 days hard labour.
He had a wife in London. Well, what's going on here?
Marriage certificate. Solemnised at the parish church of the parish of St George the Martyr, Southwark, in the county of London, January 1st, 1912.
My name's Stanley Victor Morrow.
Age?
Age?
24.
Condition?
Bachelor.
Rank and position?
Author and composer.
Residence at time of marriage?
57 Lebard Street.
Father's name and surname?
Father's name and surname?
William Henry Morrell. Tradesman.
Name and surname of the bride?
Ada Mary Damery.
Age?
19.
Condition?
Spinster.
Rank or profession? Residence at the time of marriage?
57 at Lebard Street with Stanley.
Father's name and surname?
Frederick Thomas Damery.
Rank and profession of father?
Decorator.
Married in the parish church according to the rites and ceremonies of the established church by me, A.C. Wilkinson. So he's got 2 wives. Is that correct, Sally? 2 wives.
He has 2 wives, you'll see.
You don't know anything about me. Look,
tell us.
I was born in 1887, London, Clerkenwell. Do you know Clerkenwell?
I do.
I used to be a carman, but not earning enough.
Whoa, what's a carman?
A carman? I deliver goods like vegetables and stuff. A van man. But you see, not earning enough money, I decided to change my vocation.
Oh, was that because of your eyesight?
No, I put that on the begging cart. Oh. Now, anyway, as I was saying, I decided to change my vocation. Now, I always had an ear for beautiful music.
A wonderful talent, Stanley.
Thank you, love. So I became a composer and a musician. And because I enjoyed what I did, I took my God-given talent and shared my compositions on the streets of London. And because I was earning enough money, I decided to become national. And I ended up in Leicester. And my wife...
I'm his wife.
My wife, well, and my 2 kids.
Hey, what are you on about 2 kids?
Hang on.
No, well, my wife.
I'm your wife.
Yes, I know you're my wife.
Actually, he's got a wife.
I'm his wife.
Hold on, who's that?
Oh.
He's my wife. Who are you?
I'm his wife. Who are you?
I'm the mother of his children. I am the mother of his children. I have a 16-week-old son.
Ladies, why
Stanley?
don't we just take this? Yes, my love. Yes, my love.
Where have you been?
I've been around, I've been working.
Just abandoned me and the
Oh,
children.
come on. You know I wouldn't do that.
Working.
Pardon?
Wouldn't do what? I haven't. If you've been working, where's the money?
Love, I was saving it for you. Now let's take this somewhere else. Let's not talk in front of the public. Please, my love. All right?
Talk in front of I don't care about the public. I couldn't care unless you're a worthless.
Well, I'm his wife. Don't speak to him like that.
And what has it got to do with you, you home-wrecking harlot?
Don't talk to my wife like that.
I'm your wife.
Never actually got married. You know we didn't.
My mum was right about you.
Come on, love.
You
All
are.
mother-in-laws are like that. Listen, I love you.
Do you
know
even
I
care
do.
about your son?
Of course I care. Now, come on, let's take this somewhere else. We'll talk about it later.
Love her, Stanley. Why are you? She just called me a harlot.
Listen, love, it's no
Please,
problem. She's just a bit angry.
To do with you. It's nothing to do with you. This is between me and my husband.
It's plenty to do with me.
Ladies, please, come on.
Everyone, I think we should just calm down a bit because there's quite a lot of people watching. So maybe it would be nice if Ada, could you tell us how you and Stanley hooked up in the first place?
Yeah, I can definitely tell you about me and my Stanley.
Did you meet in Leicester?
No, we didn't meet in Leicester. We met in Clerkenwell. I'm from Clerkenwell and I was taking my morning promenade down the street and I heard this beautiful piano music. And in front of me, I saw this beautiful man, Stanley, and I joined in with his song. And we packed all that we could pack in the tailwood at the back, till there wasn't any room for me to ride all together. My old man said, follow the van and don't dilly-dally on the way. Off went the van with me old house in it. I followed on with me old cock linnet. It was a wonderful meeting. Stanley and I connected immediately and we took up together. Stanley was playing his street piano and I was singing along with him. But we decided there was more money to be made out of town. So with my love, Stanley, we travelled all the way to Leicester. And we were playing the piano, happily making our money and singing. And that was when we got arrested. That was when we got arrested. Now, I told them police, I told them I was 22, but I was in fact 17 at the time. But I didn't like them in my business. And then I got 7 days hard labour in the jail. And it turned out that when I was in jail, I was pregnant.
Wow.
Wow, okay. Indeed. I did 7 days hard labour and I was pregnant with our very first child. Oh, Stanley, do you remember our first?
Yeah, I sure do. Go on, tell them all.
I will. We had baby Amelia and then shortly after that, we had baby Gladys as well. Do you remember? And we had our 2 babies.
And was that the completion of your family, or that was it, just the 2 of them?
No. After that, we had our little boy, didn't we, Stanley?
Yeah, we did. And his name was Stanley.
Little Stanley. But
Nice.
little Stanley didn't make it. Little Stanley passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And
not long after that,
yeah.
My love, my husband, Stanley, went to war.
To the Great War.
Commonwealth War Graves Commission, Debt of Honour. Stanley Victor Morrell. Death dates 30th November 1917. Regiment number R39559. Rank Rifleman. Regiment King's Royal Rifles Company. Cambria Memorial, Le Louvre, France.
The Cambrai Memorial commemorates more than 7,000 servicemen who died at the Battle of Cambrai in 1917 and whose graves are not known. They described the object of the Cambrai operations as the gaining of a local success by a sudden attack at a point where the enemy did not expect it, and to some extent they succeeded. The attack began early in the morning of 20th November 1917, and initial advances were remarkable. However, by 22nd of November, a halt was called for rest and reorganization, allowing the Germans to reinforce. From 23rd to 28th of November, the fighting was concentrated almost entirely around Bourton Wood. It was clear the Germans were ready for a major counterattack. During the fierce fighting of the next 5 days, much of the ground gained in the initial days of the attack was lost. So what did you do then?
Well, in 1920, I got married again to James MacDonald, and I lived my life with James and my 2 children by Stanley, Amelia and Gladys. But I still miss Stanley though.
The National Role of the Great War, Section 2, London. Stanley Victor Morrell joined in June 1916, and on completion of his training was drafted overseas. He served on the Western Front, where he took part in many engagements and was killed in action at Cambrai in December 1917. He was entitled to the General Service and Victory Medals.
Thank you, everyone. That was Stanley Victor Morrell and Ada Damery, a double act. So very different pair of people, very different set of subjects to perhaps any of the people that we've done before. One of the things that we've noticed in reading about people is we hear so little about groups. We only hear about individuals. So it was nice to come across a double act. Somebody remarked looking at those photographs at the beginning that they sort of looked like Bonnie and Clyde. So I don't know, yes, reactions, observations, comments, that's our second and final subject of the evening. I suppose I could go to Nick Crowson first. And Nick, this is an example of a different application perhaps of the Vagrancy Act and indicates how all embracing it was. Could you say a bit about that?
Yeah. So busking itself wasn't actually caught up in the Vagrancy Act under the very wide remit of activities, antisocial behaviours that could be prosecuted. The police could try and use the Act if they thought the quality of the music being played was particularly poor. But actually in this case, it was that begging letter that was hidden and found by the police, which was telling this story that Stanley was losing his eyesight and that he needed to have his family supported by financial donation. And it's that begging by false pretenses, which is under the remit of the 1824 Vagrancy Act.
You said something somewhere about the quality of the performance related to whether you were likely to be done or not. If you were a good enough performer, it would not be considered begging. Is that substantiated? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see this being played out probably today, don't we? Where sometimes buskers outside particular shops come into confrontation with the shop owners because the quality is thought to be not to the liking, or equally, if they're good, they're drawing a crowd. Potentially, it's a market to enter the shop. So there's these kind of nuances being played out in it. And perhaps if you think about busking now on the London Underground, for example, licensed and approved. So,
Rob, any thoughts in reaction to this rather different couple of people, rather different to the first guy?
Yeah, I think he's more than just a family man. He's clearly a bigamist, but at the end of the day, he did the right thing. He went to fight for his country, whether that was by design or by being recruited, almost press ganged. But nobody deserves to meet an end like that.
Obviously, the war is a great leveler. Tell me something about your thoughts about, and again, I invite people to put comments or questions in the chat. Sort of relationships, relationships when people are living in hostels or on the street. I mean, how does that work? Is that difficult? Is it a thing in your experience of knowing people? Is it, they clearly having a romantic relationship of some kind or other, or maybe it's just a functional protect each other relationship. What are your thoughts about that?
I think with us all being locked down in close proximity to our family, it can get a little fraught, let's say. And I can imagine that given time, I think that the two ladies in question would probably gang up against Stanley and deal with him.
Really? Okay, that's your fantasy. Interestingly, Prue Schemes asks Nick, I think, is anything known about what happened to the first wife and her kids? I mean, presumably this is virtually an endless process. You could follow everybody in all these stories, and that would be the rest of your life sorted, Nick.
So one of the things I've been wrestling with recently has been that you take the individual and you forget about the wider family circumstances. So I've been making a conscious effort to go back and now try and construct families around them to try and understand why it might be that Alfred took to the road and his siblings didn't. But in the case of this family, this has proved really difficult because the Rosina and Stanley and their first child, who's also called Rosina, are there in the 1911 census. And then the second child is baptized, and the records survive for that in May 1911. But without knowing the mother's maiden name, if she is saying on the census, I've been married for 3 years, that's all I can go on. But it was only last week when we finally pulled it together and found that the first child had actually been baptized and registered at birth in her maiden name, Hobbs. So we now know that, in fact, her family was living a few doors up in Little Northampton Street. We know then that subsequently, after her abandonment by Stanley, when he's gone off now and properly married Ada, that she subsequently marries in 1915 to someone, ironically, who's a street musician. And then her mother is caught up in a notorious attempted murder trial where she's one of the recipients of a package that has a loaded gun with the instruction to pull a piece of string that's meant to fire the gun that goes to the Old Bailey in 1923. So the trail is continuing to unravel before me, or rather coming together before me. So
you've got a whole spin-off series there,
yeah.
I'd say.
Movie now.
Widening the frame of reference. Interesting. Any other questions, please put them in. David, I'm interested in David, who was reading him, and David, I know, has done his fair share of charming people at different times. David, any thoughts about this guy?
Well, yeah. Hi, guys. When you asked the question that you asked before, what do we think of them? Well, he reminded me, I think I mentioned he looked like Bert, Barney and Clyde, both of them together. And
I was using
because
Bonnie and Clyde. Can we see David and Miranda by any chance? It would be lovely to see David talking. Yeah, go on, David.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
and also the fact that I saw him as a player or a kind of streetwise person. So unlike Alfred Draper, he dressed up, this guy, and I think he could deal with people. He was a people's person. He was a street hustler. Let me put it like that. And he looks like a street hustler, and that's what I got from him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and who else would like to comment about?
Yeah, to me, he looked like somebody that could play people and, manage to whittle things from them, like if he was playing music, get money from him or various things, whereas the other one, he was just ignored and picked up as a vagrant.
So very interesting. So more more agency in these guys' cases. The other guy feels, doesn't he? Interesting. He feels like he's made more the victim of circumstances. But with these guys, you feel they are making more of their lives, if you see what I mean. They're more in charge of their lives. David, I know your time of persuaded people to buy incense sticks.
Yeah.
Does it require a deal of, what are the key skills required to survive and thrive in that when you're on the street, basically hustling that?
Yeah, I think it's having the ability to like talk and get on with people, a people's person, and to basically charm people. I mean, charm's not necessarily a good thing. You charm for what you want. So I think he had a bit of that, and he looks like he had a bit of that. He was quite good looking as well, wasn't he? With his hat like tilted. So he looked like the guy. He looked like a hustler, a 19th century hustler.
Yeah, the gift of the gab.
Yeah, the gift of the gab. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah. Any other comments? Please just unmute yourselves and say something. And in the meantime, Libby or Nikki, any observations about those women?
Yeah. Hi. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
Whoever speaks.
It's Tracy. Unfortunately, I can't. For some reason, I can't start my video, but I've been listening all along.
Yeah.
I actually think he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. You know, I think he actually thinks he's doing. Oh, hello. I think he actually genuinely believes that he's doing absolutely right. He's dapper. Why shouldn't he? He's charming. He's got this double life. And he's helping. He's happy. Other people are happy. And I don't think he actually realises the consequences, and he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong at all.
Okay, interesting. Okay, he's a bigamist. We don't know whether his two paramours know of each other's existence. It's our speculation. We resist bringing them together like that. So maybe Libby, who was reading that, or Nikki, who was reading Rosina, thoughts? How was it? What do you feel about these guys?
Well, I think Ada genuinely loved him. That was the decision that I made, that she fell in love with him and she had this wonderful romance with him. She was very much ride or die. She had his back. So she helped him write the signs, you know, make sure that they could get as much money as possible, but also was very much had his back in court, did the time, came back out to him, a very loyal, loving woman. And I love the fact as well that she was actually 17 when she took up with him, but she told the police she was 22. And that kind of like little extra layer of even lying to the police for him, because I don't want this to be looked on as bad, or however it might have been looked on. So I really love her as a character. I think she's great.
Yeah, she's smitten by a man in a hat when she's 17, maybe. Yeah.
And I have to add that Rosina is probably besotted with him also, because after the first child not being registered in his name, I know that they were obviously not married and he would not come to the registry office with her. So she had to register alone with her parents' address. So it had already abandoned her, but she chose to have another child with him. So she must have also been besotted and loved him and believed all of his tales and stuff that that was. Whoever that is happy as well. I want to be as happy as them.
This is what you do when you invite people to turn their microphones on. Any other observations? So some comments in the chat about what was there out there? Very good. What was there out there to help vagrants, so-called vagrants, at that time? And yes, the Salvation Army there in various forms. But I think it's demanding.
Your interest in
maybe the host could mute
exhibition on Iran and an hour-long lecture and questions and answers. And
well,
I must have
start talking about us.
And then I think it was the kind of thing we look into.
Okay. I don't know whether we have the power to mute that vagrant voice. If you do, that would be great, because we're probably subject to hearing things we shouldn't be hearing. And Nick, the Salvation Army pops up in the early 19th century, is that right?
It's about the 1880s, I think. It kind of sets up as it. So you've got two choices, and this is actually something interesting about Alfred's life. We've got the workhouse system, which essentially is the safety net that the state, or rather the local parishes, have provided for the pauper poor, the deserving poor. The tramp, the vagrant, is not considered so worthy, and they can avail themselves of the casual ward, or the tramp ward as it was kind of colloquially known. Conditions were pretty awful. Alfred never appears to have used the workhouse system. So either he's actually quite a successful beggar and is actually securing sufficient funds through his activities to be able to pay for cheap lodgings, or he's doing sleeping as much as is needed. And then on the other side of this, you have the lodging house system, which is essentially a private entrepreneurs who, depending on the condition of the accommodation, will charge a nightly rental fee. Or there are also then a range of charities such as the Salvation Army or the Church Army, which provide a range of types of hostel accommodation, some quite small scale, some notoriously massive.
And all of these place different demands on you. I mean, for the Salvation Army, you have to literally sing for your supper or pray for your supper. I mean, the expectation is that, isn't it? And the casual ward, you're likely to have to stay a certain length of time. You might be given some labor there in the time. So it points to, for me, I'm thinking that, you know, people detected a certain pride in Stanley Victor Murrell in looking at his picture, and maybe he's too proud to resort to those things. And as you say, he can manage without them, because all of those experiences presumably were humiliating, more or less. You were subject to authority looking down on you and talking down to you. Rob, I know you've done a little bit of work on the local Coventry sort of social history of you found a hostel which was a convent or something?
No, it was an old monastery called Whitefriars, which during the dissolution was closed down by our friend Henry, and it was turned into a workhouse and was still carrying on up until the mid 1900s, when it finally sort of stopped being a poor workhouse for people who were unemployed due to economic downturns in weaving and heaven only knows what else that led to my interest in it. So, but there were lots of other poor charities as well in Coventry, sponsored by some benefactors.
Very good. Very interesting. I suppose a sort of final question tonight really is, Chelsea makes the comment, the tenacity of everyday people to survive, live and love in those times and now shows the power of resilience in human nature. That's very well put. When needed by political and economical gain, the everyday people are thrown under the bus, all for the good of the country. Yeah, I mean, reading these stories, people really had to be resourceful to survive, and you were so close to poverty, and particularly women. I mean, women often, these women latching onto these men, obviously that's a survival technique in many cases, because it's simply too tough to survive out there otherwise. Any last observations anybody wants to make? I mean, I suppose the big question is, you know, how different is it now? How many of these things are timeless, and how many of these things have been improved in what we see around us? Any observations? Maybe people we haven't heard from for a moment. And again, please just unmute yourself and thrust your voice in. It's absolutely fine. I'm not in control of this.
Adrian, I just want to say, a lot of my work is going around the country. I think that stigma and the kind of way you're viewed by society is the same. I mean, if you're unkempt, if you can't wash, there's a judgment value. The only thing that might have changed is the quality of hostels in certain places will be, you could have the luxury of an ensuite room, and that's purely privacy, but you can still feel the residues are there, the aggressive beggar. And I was talking to some of the guys who were in hotels, Rob, and they really felt they were only taken off the street and put in to protect the public from COVID. They didn't feel it was to protect them, which I found really interesting.
No.
Why did they feel they were, being taken off because they might be the problem?
Very interesting. Rob?
No, excuse me. I found when I was homeless and I was on the street, I was sent from one place to another place. And when I got there, I found I was turned away because I want a refugee. And eventually the police ended up saying I could go stop in the police station on an evening. They gave me breakfast on a morning, but that was about it. I had to spend the whole day out in the street. I couldn't claim benefits or anything. And this is not so long ago. So to me, if the police hadn't said I could have stopped there, I could have been out on the street, sleeping on the street, and God knows what would have happened.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks very much for that. And thanks for turning yourself on and being visible. It's so nice to see your face. And thanks, Gary. Also, in the lifetime we've been working with cardboard citizens, hostels have definitely improved, haven't they? They have improved in quality. But I suppose what we're getting here is the more elemental feelings people have about homeless people or about people who are not housed, and the general fear of people who are outdoors, and that seems to abide. Rob, did you have thoughts about that, and about how we talked a little bit at the top of the thing about Coventry and housing people in this COVID period? Any thoughts about what Terry was just saying about the hotels?
Yes, I think that may be a misconception. I think it's to make people feel good in themselves at other people's expense. It's sort of, out of sight, out of mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
well, yes. Does anybody else want to say anything else? Because it's probably closing time. So very interesting comments.
Sorry. Yeah,
yes, please. Please speak. That's whoever is speaking, speak. I like these voices that come from nowhere. They're great.
Hello. Sorry, it's Tracy. Yes, it was only 5.5 years ago. Myself, I was put in a hotel. It sounds lovely. I mean, I was made homeless, and it wasn't my fault. It was the landlord. There's all sorts of difficulties, but it was in a village. And it was very uncanny because I grew up in that village and I babysat in that village, and it was a posh hotel. But because I was in the hotel as a homeless person, there was two different elements of it: the paying guests and the not paying guests. So we were the hidden ones that weren't allowed to be seen by the paying public.
Wow.
And that was, it wasn't very nice. And then I did move on to the Salvation Army Live House. So,
what was the Salvation Army like at that time? Did you say this was 5 years ago or something?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I first went there and I was, I'm disabled, on crutches, and yes, the homeless bill has come for the first time ever. That was with the help of crisis at Westminster. To give people that little bit longer from their eviction notice. But I still had to, go and present myself as a homeless person, not knowing quite what was going to happen. Although, thank goodness, I had a lot of help from the law centre in Coventry at the time. And they just said, right, go to this hostel. So I went there, sat there for a while. All these fights broke out. Police came. I was terrified. Then I was told, well, you can't stay here. Sent me off to this hotel, which was the side of the city in a remote village. And I was there for, I don't know, about 9 weeks or something. Then the phone call came. I had to go back to this hostel. Just like that, I had half an hour to get back there, and they'd got me a room. So it's been, it's been a bit.
You're pushed
But
from
I've
pillar
been
to
worked
post.
a lot
Yeah.
with homeless people. I really have, and based on, sorry, today now I did meet Susan today, although we're both shielding, but we presented some work that we'd done for a stitch in time for the Belgrade Theatre. That's why we're in town.
Right.
And
Okay.
whilst by Greg's in town, a very nicely dressed young man approached us and said, "Oh, I'm very sorry, I'm homeless, but I need some money." We said, "Well, we haven't got any money, but we're near to Greg, so we'll gladly buy you some food." And he tutted and swore and stomped off, still swearing.
Well, it's funny that you tell that. Thank you so much, Tracy and Susan, for your thoughts and sharing that information. I mean, that takes us almost back to the beginning of the evening, where it's like we have expectations when we give people things, but perhaps we don't realize often how much anger, and very justifiable anger in many cases, they are carrying with them about the way they've been treated. And of course,
Yes, exactly.
we don't know what has just happened to them, but it's
Yes.
so interesting that we sort of expect thanks from people, and people aren't always in the state to give us thanks. But thank you very much for those stories. I think I should end there. I'm just going to end by quoting one comment from Coco Auerswald. I probably said her name wrong. And she says, continuing violence to people's bodies, continuing criminalization of people who do not have the same scaffolding to survive to independent adulthood, continuing idea of worthiness, absolutely, and unworthiness, continuing lack of provision of basic needs, which we have seen in the past year. It's pretty easy to get people indoors if you put your mind to it. So let's hope they continue to put their mind to it after this the COVID crisis is over. Continuing stigma, continuing increased vulnerability of women, continuing acceptance that it is okay for some people to be sleeping rough. Thank you. That's very eloquently put, and I'm sure it expresses a frustration and an anger that a lot of us feel. We're going to leave you there. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. I think on screen will now come details if you want to support Cardboard Citizens, about how you can in any small way support us. It's in the chat now. And thank you very much for being here and taking part in our conversation in spite of all the difficulties of the Zoom and thank you to all our participants. Thank you, Rob, for taking part remotely from Coventry, and for your Coventrian, I've got it wrong, for your insights. And thank you, Nick, as ever, and thank you all our wonderful actors for a couple of days, really hard work bringing those stories to life. And thank you, Miranda, our instant stage manager. So we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Good night. Good night.